Hey guys, thank you so much for stopping by tonight. Before you drift off into a peaceful sleep, I have a very special story to share with you. One that's soft as moonlight and deep as the sea. Tonight, we're diving into the gentle, timeless tale of Icarus and the wax wings. This is not the version you may have heard in school. This is a calm, dreamy retelling, full of golden skies, whispering winds, and the quiet beauty of a boy who once tried to touch the sun. If you enjoy stories like this, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot, and it means the world to me that you're here. Now, I hope this tale will soothe your thoughts, slow your breath, and carry you gently into a deep and restful sleep. So tuck yourself in, relax your shoulders, and let go of the day. Let's step together into the sky and begin. In the quiet heart of the island of Crete, where the wind brushed through tall cypress trees and olive groves danced beneath golden sun, a boy named Icarus lived among whispers of gods, of wings, and of a maze that changed with every step. He was no ordinary boy. Born under the gaze of both moon and flame, Icarus was the son of Daedalus, the greatest craftsman the ancient world had ever known. His father's hands could tame stone, charm wood, and coax shape from air itself. The palace of King Minos bore Daedalus's genius in every corridor and arch, but his most fabled creation remained hidden deep within, the labyrinth, a twisting prison made to hold a creature of nightmare, a beast with the body of a man and the head of a bull. Yet to Icarus, the labyrinth was only a bedtime story. His world was smaller and softer, filled with mornings of warm bread, afternoons of laughter in courtyards, and evenings spent listening to his father hum while crafting delicate bird wings from reeds and wax. But there was a hush to their life, a stillness that lingered just behind the laughter, for they were not free. Daedalus and Icarus were guests in name, but prisoners in truth. King Minos, fearing Daedalus would reveal the secrets of the labyrinth, forbade them from leaving the island. No boat, no messenger, no escape. And so the boy grew, his days echoing like ripples in a still pond, each one much like the last. But at night, at night, Icarus would dream. He would lie under the soft white netting that hung from the rafters, listening to the sea whisper stories through the window slats. He dreamed of flight, of rising above walls, beyond rules, into skies where no one could follow. He dreamed of air on his face, of wind lifting him as gently as a lullaby. He dreamed of freedom. Sometimes he would creep quietly into his father's workshop, watching from behind shelves stacked with coils of rope and melted wax. There, by a single lamp, Daedalus carved feathers with the care of a man sewing pieces of soul together. Some were long and curved, like the wings of falcons. Others were small and sharp like the tips of swallows. Icarus said nothing, but his heart beat with a rhythm that grew stronger with each passing moon. A call unspoken, a promise yet kept. Then one night, as the sea whispered its secrets, and the stars blinked in and out like the breath of titans, Daedalus finally spoke the truth. "Icarus," he said softly, not looking up from his work, "have you ever seen the gulls at dawn?" Icarus, still half asleep, rubbed his eyes. "Yes, they rise before the sun." Daedalus nodded, his hands steady. "They rise because no king tells them not to." The days that followed Daedalus's quiet confession unfolded like pages of a secret book, each one filled with hushed moments and careful plans. Icarus no longer wandered the gardens or kicked at pebbles near the fountains. Instead, he lingered close to the workshop, where the scent of warm beeswax and polished wood seemed to hum with the promise of something wondrous. Inside that narrow, sun-dappled room, Daedalus was assembling not just wings, but a dream, a fragile, feathered answer to a life lived in shadow. He worked with the patience of the old gods, aligning each plume in precise curves, as if the sky itself had whispered its design into his ear. "Icarus," he would murmur without looking up, "bring me the goose feather." "No, not that one. The longer one. It needs to bend, not snap." The boy's fingers, once idle and unsure, grew nimble. He learned to distinguish the whisper of dove feathers from the rustle of falcon down. He learned how to heat wax just enough to hold, but never to burn. He watched the way his father's hands moved, not hurriedly, not nervously, but with quiet certainty, as if the wings already existed and merely waited to be revealed. And all the while, the moon rose and fell above them, painting silver across their tools and half-finished frames. By day, they hid the wings beneath cloth and silence. But by night, when the palace slept and the sea moaned against the cliffs, they worked, father and son, side by side, lit by oil lamp and trembling hope. Icarus's heart began to change. It no longer beat for games or idle daydreams. It beat in time with wings, phantom wings he hadn't yet worn, but already felt pulsing at his back. He imagined soaring over the maze, looking down at the twisting walls that had once held monsters. He imagined leaving the island behind like a fading shadow. Sometimes he would step out onto the terrace at night, stretching his arms wide, testing the wind with his bare skin. The stars above glittered like breadcrumbs dropped by fate, pointing the way north, or home, or somewhere new entirely. Daedalus noticed. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked one evening, laying a curved frame across his lap. "The sky calling?" Icarus nodded. "It's like it's waiting." Daedalus looked up then, really looked, and Icarus saw something rare in his father's eyes. Fear. Not fear of falling, nor of failure, but something deeper. The fear of hope, fragile and precious, too easily broken. "Icarus," Daedalus said, voice low and even, "you must listen to me now, and remember every word. These wings will carry us, but they will not forgive us." The boy furrowed his brow. "Forgive us?" Daedalus leaned closer, his hands cupping Icarus's shoulders. "You must not fly too low, for the sea's breath will dampen the feathers. And you must not fly too high, or the sun's fire will melt the wax. The sky is vast, but there is only one true path within it." Icarus swallowed, the excitement in his chest slowing into something steadier, more careful. "I'll remember." "Good," Daedalus whispered, brushing a stray curl from his son's brow. "Because the sky remembers everything." That night, as Icarus curled beneath his linen sheets, the air seemed thicker, fuller. The breeze outside wasn't just the wind. It was a whisper, like the beginning of a story just waiting to be told. And in his dream, he saw himself standing on the highest cliff, the wings upon his back already spread, trembling gently in the air. Below, the sea roared like a sleeping god. Above, the clouds parted, revealing a path of gold through the heavens. He took a step forward, and the world fell away. The morning air had changed. It was a subtle shift, like the way a melody changes key when no one is watching. The wind, which once strolled lazily through the palace gardens, now seemed more urgent, more knowing. It carried with it the smell of salt and distant places. The gulls cried louder. The ocean stirred more deeply, and Icarus, standing on the terrace in his bare feet, could feel the sky pressing closer, as if it too was preparing for something. The wings were nearly complete. By now, Icarus could lace them himself, threading shoulder straps of soft leather, tightening the frame so that the joints flexed with his arms. He had grown strong from lifting the weighted prototypes, running along the cliffs to test their balance. Though the wings were still fragile, made of wax and faith, they no longer felt like costumes. They felt like promises. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind Mount Ida, Daedalus brought him a set of feathers unlike the others. These were dark and broad, gleaming slightly as if kissed by twilight. "Eagle feathers," he said, handing them over one by one. "They'll give you strength in the turns." Icarus held them with reverence, as if they had been plucked from the cloak of a god. "How did you get these?" Daedalus smiled softly. "Sometimes the world gives a gift when it senses a purpose." They worked in deeper silence that night, the bond between them growing not just from blood, but from shared vision. There were no longer questions or doubts. There were only steps, each one taken carefully, precisely, toward the edge of something vast. Still, Daedalus watched his son closely, not with suspicion, but with worry that hid behind fatherly patience. He saw how Icarus lingered longer at the edge of the cliffs, how his eyes followed the falcons high into the clouds, rather than watching the horizon like a sailor might. He knew the look. It was the same one he'd had when he first created the labyrinth. A fire that made you believe rules were meant to be tested. On the seventh day, after the final feather was set, Daedalus declared the wings ready. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we fly." That night, the boy could not sleep. The stars seemed brighter than they ever had before, as if the sky itself had opened its 1,000 eyes to witness what would come. Icarus sat by the window, the sea wind tangling his hair, the unfinished map of their escape sketched faintly on the table beside him. His fingers traced the invisible lines of their flight, first northward, avoiding the palace watchtowers, then east, where the warm air would lift them steadily higher, finally west, across the sea toward Sicily, where a quiet harbor and freedom waited. He knew the plan. He had memorized every detail, but his heart whispered of something else, something more. What if, once they escaped, he didn't follow the map? What if he flew higher than the cliffs, higher than the gulls, higher than the thoughts that had ever held him down? What would the world look like from there? He closed his eyes, listening to the night, and for a moment he swore he could hear the wind speaking. It didn't speak in words, not exactly, but it had a rhythm, a hum, like the sound of wings long before they beat the air. It sang of sky kingdoms and clouds that shaped themselves like sleeping lions. It spoke of the place where stars were born. It offered something deeper than freedom. It offered belonging. The boy opened his eyes and whispered, "I'm not afraid." And it was true. His hands were steady, his breath calm. Far away in the chambers of the palace, Daedalus stirred in his sleep. Perhaps he, too, heard the wind's secret song. Perhaps he dreamt of the sun, who now stood taller, straighter, his gaze fixed not on the horizon, but far above it. Dawn rose like a breath held too long. The horizon blushed softly as the first light kissed the edges of the world. Shadows retreated into corners, and the sky, vast and pale, opened itself like a waiting hand. The sea below was calm, a shimmering silver sheet that stretched to where sky and water merged without boundary. On the highest cliff that framed the palace's outer edge, Daedalus and Icarus stood. There were no words, not at first, only the sound of waves folding against rock and the soft hiss of wind combing through dry grass. Icarus stared out at the open sky, wings slung across his back, bound by straps of treated leather. Each feather glinted with dew, trembling slightly in the breeze. The weight felt unfamiliar but thrilling, like wearing a storm that had not yet begun. Daedalus knelt beside him, checking every strap, every seam. He was quiet, his face not stern, not afraid, but solemn. There was reverence in his hands, not just for the invention, but for the boy who now bore it. "Flex your arms," he murmured. Icarus obeyed. The wings responded, expanding wide. The curve was perfect. They caught the wind gently, lifting a little without effort. Daedalus nodded. "Good. Now, listen carefully." Icarus turned to face him. "Once we launch," his father said, voice steady as carved stone, "we'll glide east. The air will carry us. You must keep close. Don't chase the gulls. Don't test the sun. Remember the line between sea spray and firelight. Stay with me, and we will make it." Icarus met his gaze. "I remember." Daedalus searched his eyes, as if trying to find something, some last trace of the child who once chased butterflies across palace courtyards. But what he found instead was someone older, someone shaped by longing and light, a boy who had outgrown the walls of his cage. He placed a hand on his son's cheek. "You're not just flying away from something. You're flying toward who you are meant to be." Icarus smiled, quiet and soft. "Then let's find out who that is." They walked together to the edge. The sky felt closer now, so close that it hummed in their ears. The air lifted the feathers gently, like a whisper of encouragement. Daedalus looked out at the sea and took a breath. "I'll go first. Watch how I move. When I signal, follow." And with that, he stepped forward, arms wide, and leapt. The wind caught him at once. The wings held. His body dipped for a heartbeat, then rose, sweeping gracefully into the morning. He glided like a heron over the cliffs, silent and powerful, curving gently with the breeze. Icarus stepped forward alone. The cliff beneath his feet was jagged and cool, the last solid thing he might ever touch. The world before him was vast and unknowable, but the wind, it knew him. It welcomed him, folding around his frame, tugging at his wings with playful fingers. The sea called below, the sky whispered above, and Icarus ran. Each step was a drumbeat. The wings flared wide. His shadow stretched long across the rocks, and then, with a single cry, half born of joy, half born of awe, he leapt. For a breathless moment, there was only stillness. Then came the wind. It filled the wings, lifting him in a sudden rush. The cliff fell away. The earth became a memory. Icarus soared. The sky wrapped around him like silk. Air curled beneath his wings, buoying him higher, wider. Below, the sea sparkled, a million tiny mirrors catching the sun. Ahead, Daedalus flew in wide, steady arcs, gesturing calmly with one arm. Icarus adjusted his wings, mimicking the movement. The wind obeyed. He laughed. It was not a sound meant for earth. It belonged to the sky, to the endless blue that now held him gently in its palm. For the first time in his life, he was more than a boy. He was flight. He was freedom. Icarus flew. There were no walls in the sky, no locked gates or guards. There were no whispered warnings or narrow corridors. Only space. Only motion. The wind played across his face like cool fingers of a friend he had never known. The wings responded to each breath of air with grace, flexing and gliding. catching the updrafts like sails blessed by a kindly sea god. Below him, the ocean shimmered in gentle waves, its slow heartbeat echoing into the sky. The world, once massive and looming, now looked small, like a child's drawing, rendered in soft blue and green. Icarus laughed again, the sound light and clear, floating higher than any tower he had ever seen. To the east, Daedalus soared with calm and practiced movements. His form carved smooth arcs through the morning air, a rhythm shaped by wisdom and control. Every motion he made was a message, every shift in balance a quiet instruction. And Icarus followed, not out of obedience, but in admiration. He watched his father's steadiness, his patience, and tried to match it. For a while he did. But the sky has its own language, and it spoke to Icarus in ways his father's hands could not. It whispered in spirals and lifts. It nudged him higher, where the air thinned just slightly, and the light turned golden white. It sang to him of things far beyond Crete, of snow-tipped mountains in the north, of forests so vast their green swallowed entire days, of distant lands where cities shimmered like glass on the edge of rivers. And Icarus listened. He tilted his wings and rose slightly, catching a different current. The air carried him higher, faster, the sea falling away in a blur of silver and foam. Daedalus, noticing the shift, signaled sharply. "Down," the gesture said. "Stay close." Icarus hesitated. He adjusted, dipped a little in obedience. But just then, a gull swept past him, crying out, its wings beating strong. It turned upward, rising into the wind, spiraling with ease. Icarus followed without thinking, his own wings catching the same draft. The world changed. The breeze grew cooler, cleaner. The sky widened, pulling him into its arms like a parent greeting a long-lost child. The feathers of his wings trembled, not with strain, but with delight. He was not fighting the wind. He was dancing with it. Below him, Daedalus leveled off, hovering just above the wave tips, eyes scanning the rising boy with growing concern. He shouted, his voice nearly swallowed by the vastness between them. "Icarus! Too high!" But Icarus barely heard, not out of defiance, but because the sky was singing. It was not a song of words. It was a feeling that filled his chest with light, a rhythm in his bones. Every beat of his wings matched the wind's exhale. Every tilt of his body flowed with the motion of the clouds. He spun once in midair, arms outstretched, feeling the sunlight kiss his cheeks. For a moment, he closed his eyes, and in that moment, he felt something he had never truly known: belonging. He was not just a boy, born in the shadow of a maze. He was not just a prisoner's son. He was a creature of wind and breath and freedom. The boy who had watched gulls from behind walls was now above them all. When he opened his eyes, the world was different. Below, the sea was no longer calm, but distant. The island of Crete looked like a smear of green and stone. The palace was gone from view. Even Daedalus was barely a shape now. Low, controlled, cautious. And Icarus, he was high, too high. But it did not yet feel dangerous. The air was thin, yes, but it was also pure. Every breath was like drinking light. Every gust of wind wrapped around his wings like silk threads. Still, he remembered. The warning: not too high, not too low. The middle path. He angled his wings slightly, testing his descent. The wind resisted. It did not want to let him go. It lifted him again, effortlessly, as if the sky itself had chosen him. Below, Daedalus continued to gesture, his form smaller now, a speck of worry moving across the horizon. But Icarus's gaze drifted upward, toward the vast, glowing vault where the sun waited. Not yet near, but closer than before, It hung above him, like a god's eye, watching, warm and magnificent. It did not burn, yet. It only shimmered, and in that shimmer was promise, not of death, but of something more. Daedalus felt the shift before he saw it. He had known the sky for many years. He had studied its silence, measured its moods. He understood the pull of wind and the weight of sunlight, the unseen tides that moved above the world just as surely as the sea rolled below it. And he could sense, without needing to look, that Icarus was drifting too far. He angled his wings, catching a low current that hugged the waves. The wind here was warmer, safer, steady as a sailor's rope. But his eyes were fixed above, where the figure of his son had grown smaller and brighter, gliding toward the heart of the sky like a feathered flame. Daedalus's chest tightened. It was not yet fear, but it was the cousin of fear. Something colder than worry, sharper than regret. He had seen that look in Icarus's eyes before. The hunger for more, for the edge of things. The boy had always chased the horizon, even before he could walk without stumbling. He tilted upward, calling out, his voice thin against the wind. "Icarus, ease your wings. Come down." But the distance between them was growing, not just in height, but in something else. Icarus was no longer gliding by instruction. He was flying by instinct, moved not by plan, but by a deeper calling. Up in the higher currents, Icarus heard the cry, faint and distant. It brushed against his ears like a warning whispered through a dream. He looked down, saw his father far below, steadfast, controlled, earthbound even in flight. A flicker of guilt passed through him. He had promised. He had nodded and said yes when his father warned him. He had listened, truly listened. But now, suspended in the golden light, with the sky wrapping around him like silk, it all seemed so far away. The rules belonged to the world beneath him, and he was no longer of that world. So he rose, not in defiance, not in pride, but in a kind of innocent wonder. The air here was lighter, less familiar. It moved differently, like a song with no rhythm, a breeze made of light itself. The feathers on his wings quivered, catching the smallest shifts. His heart beat slower, more deeply. Everything felt distant and clear, as though he were moving through a dream, half asleep and half awake. Above him, the sun drifted closer. It was not yet burning, not yet cruel. It hovered in the sky like a great lantern, warm and radiant, pulsing with ancient life. Its golden rays streamed down in ribbons, casting halos on the thin clouds. Icarus watched in awe as the world below began to vanish, not from sight, but from importance. In the silence, a new sound emerged, a low hum. At first he thought it was the wind, but it came from within, an echo in his ribs, a gentle thrumming in his bones, as though the wings had not just become part of him, but always were. He drifted higher, stretching his arms wider, allowing the sun to pour over him like honey. The wax along the wings began to soften, ever so slightly, warmed by the touch of light. But he did not notice, not yet, because in that moment he saw something. Far off in the distance, where sky met sky, where no clouds dared drift, he saw a flicker, a shape that moved not like a bird, but like thought itself, a shimmer of silver, a spiral of light. It vanished in a blink, leaving only the question it carved in his mind. What else is waiting up here? He looked back down once more. His father was still flying, still faithful to the course, still small in the vastness of blue. Daedalus gestured again, this time with both arms. Slow, broad motions, like a shepherd calling his flock from the storm. The movements were urgent now. Icarus, return! The boy hovered midair, the wings gently rising and falling with the breath of the sky. For the briefest moment, he considered it. To tilt his wings, to descend, to follow the map, the plan, the promise. But the wind shifted again. It tugged at him, not hard, but with playful persistence. It wrapped around him like a cloak and whispered once more, just a little higher. And so he rose, not out of rebellion, not out of arrogance, but because the sky had called, and he had answered, higher now. The sky deepened to a pale, radiant blue, thin as spun glass, touched with gold. The clouds below drifted like sleeping giants on the sea. Icarus moved among them as though they were old friends, brushing past their edges, weaving in and out of their slow spirals. The light grew clearer, brighter, washing every feather in silver fire. He laughed again, quieter now, almost reverent, as though he feared disturbing the breath of the heavens. The sun, which once seemed impossibly distant, now loomed above him with gentle majesty. It did not burn with anger or fury. It pulsed like a great heart in the sky, warm and welcoming, a father reaching down with open arms. Rays of light poured over Icarus's shoulders, his face, his back. He turned slowly in midair, letting the brilliance soak into him. And he was beautiful there, in that moment. The wings stretched wide, broad and gleaming, catching the sun like sails spun from starlight. His red-gold hair curled behind him like fire. His eyes shone with wonder, not pride. There was no triumph in his gaze, only awe. He was not a conqueror of the sky. He was its guest, its child. But the sky, for all its beauty, held rules not made for men. And the sun, for all its light, held power not meant for wax. At first, he did not feel it. The warmth was gentle, like bathwater in early spring. But as the minutes passed, that warmth deepened. It pressed closer. The wax at his shoulders softened further. Tiny drops formed at the seams between feathers, like beads of sweat. One by one, they trembled, then fell, invisible in the wind. Still, Icarus did not see. He was gazing northward now, where the clouds parted to reveal a mountain range hidden in the distance, its peaks glowing faintly through the sky's veil. He imagined landing there, alone, unseen, living in a high place where only birds kept company. A place where he could fly each day at dawn and sleep beneath stars, untouched by kings or questions. A sudden tremor passed through his left wing. He tilted, adjusting instinctively, and continued gliding. Below, Daedalus had changed course. He was no longer climbing, no longer gesturing. He had begun descending slowly, steadily, searching for a safe landing among the rocky outcroppings that marked the southern cliffs of a distant island. But even from far below, he could see the first shudder ripple through Icarus's wings, and he knew. "No," he whispered to the wind. "Not yet. Not now." Up above, Icarus began to notice, not the wax, not the danger, but the slight resistance in his right wing, a stiffness where once it had flowed like water. He glanced down and saw, just for a heartbeat, that one feather was missing. Another hung loosely, fluttering in the wind. His smile faded. Confused, he shifted his weight, tried to stabilize his glide. Another tremor, a faint popping sound, almost like the cracking of pine cones over fire. And then he saw it. The wax, melting, dripping, vanishing. "No." The word escaped his lips, soft and breathless. He looked toward the sun, not in anger, not in fear, but in disbelief, as if he had expected it to protect him, as if the sky, so full of welcome and song, could betray him now. But the sky had made no promise, and the sun had only shone. The wing sagged suddenly to one side. Feathers fluttered away like startled birds. The wind no longer held him in balance. It spun him, turned him, made him wobble. He flapped his arms, trying to regain lift, but the wings no longer obeyed. The right side collapsed further. He dipped forward, the weight unbalanced, and the motion became a fall. Not steep, not sudden, but slow. A drifting descent that grew faster with each passing breath. The wind, once his companion, howled past him now. And below, far, far below, the sea waited. The sky no longer cradled him. It had held him gently, like a lullaby, like a dream wrapped in blue silk. But now it let go, not in cruelty, not in punishment, but in silence. Icarus was falling. It was not a plunge, not at first. The descent began like a glide misstepped, a drifting leaf that lost its rhythm, a bird with one wing broken. The sea below, once a distant thought far beneath him, now grew larger with each heartbeat. The feathers flew away in slow arcs, one by one, as if mourning. Some caught in the wind and vanished. Others spiraled gently downward, glowing in the sunlight, before being swallowed by the wide sky. Icarus felt the world shift around him. The air was no longer his friend. It rushed past his ears with a sound like a rising storm. His arms ached with effort as he tried to slow the fall, but the wax had melted. The wing frames twisted and bent under his weight. The beauty was gone. Still, he did not scream. Not yet. He looked to the horizon, blinking against the wind. The mountains he had dreamed of now flickered like distant ghosts. The clouds he once danced among now floated above him, unreachable. And the sun, it was still there, glowing quietly. It had not moved. It had not judged. It had simply been. "I was so close," he whispered, though no one could hear him. He remembered his father's voice. Not too high, not too low. But the line between them had blurred. He had not wanted to disobey. He had not wanted to fall. He had only wanted more. More sky, more wind, more of the feeling that had made his heart soar beyond what his body could hold. And for a moment, he had touched it, the purest freedom. Then it had slipped away. Now the sea waited. Its surface gleamed like polished stone, blue and infinite. He could hear it now, the slow rhythm of waves folding into one another, closer, louder. Icarus began to fall faster, his limbs stretched wide, wings failing. The air was no longer a cushion. It was a river pulling him down. And still, he did not cry out, because somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the ache and the rushing wind, he still carried the memory of what it had felt like to rise. It stayed with him, even as the feathers left him, even as the sky receded, even as the sea opened its arms. Far below, Daedalus saw him. He had circled back, panic blooming in his chest the moment he noticed his son's form faltering. He flew as fast as the wings would carry him, his eyes locked on the spiraling shape above. He shouted again and again, the name he had whispered into cradles, into stories, into the night. Icarus. But the sky did not echo it back. Daedalus watched helplessly as his son twisted once, twice, arms reaching as if trying to grasp the wind itself. The wings collapsed completely. One final feather fluttered upward, as if reluctant to follow. Then Icarus dropped into the sea. There was no great splash, no thunderous crash, only a soft bloom of white in the blue, as if the ocean had drawn a breath and gently closed over him, and the world went quiet. Daedalus hovered above the waves, calling, calling. His wings beat slowly now, heavy with sorrow. He searched the waters for some sign, for a hand, a shadow, a ripple that didn't belong. But there was nothing. Only the ocean, vast and deep, returning once more to its ancient rhythm. The sky held no trace of the boy who had dared to dream. No monument marked the fall. No god descended to explain. But somewhere, perhaps far below the water, where coral gardens sway and the world forgets the weight of names, the memory of wings still lingers. Somewhere, the sea carries the echo of his laughter, caught on the wind between one heartbeat and the next, and the sun, steady in its path, shines on. The sea had taken him. It did not roar when it closed. It did not wail nor resist. It simply received Icarus into its vastness the way a mother draws a child into her arms after a long journey. It pulled him from the air with a breathless sigh, then wrapped him in silence. Beneath its shimmering surface, time slowed, softened. And all that had been, flight, firelight, feathers, was folded gently into the current. For a long while, there was only stillness. The waves swayed without urgency. Fish drifted near, curious but quiet, their bright scales flashing in the dim light. Ribbons of seaweed whispered through the water like distant lullabies. And the feathers, those precious feathers, twirled downward in lazy spirals, settling beside rocks and coral like autumn leaves on a forest floor. Above, the world continued. Daedalus hovered in the sky, motionless, the wings no longer beating with purpose, but held open by habit. His eyes scanned the water until they could no longer bear to see. He descended slowly, landing on a narrow outcrop that jutted into the sea like a finger pointing to nowhere. He did not weep, not yet. He sat upon the stone, letting the wind wrap around him, his hands resting on his knees. The wings folded slowly behind his back, creaking like tired wood. The silence was thick here, thicker than air, thicker than grief. And in that silence, the world turned, quietly, unfeeling, unchanged. Was this the punishment? He wondered. To build wonders, but never be allowed to keep them? He stared out to where the sea and sky met, and could not tell where one ended and the other began. And slowly, hour by hour, day by day, the world went on. Ships passed far in the distance, sails full of stories Daedalus would never hear. Birds wheeled in the sky above, oblivious to the boy who had flown among them. Rain came, soft and silver, washing the stone clean, and the sun, faithful and quiet, rose and fell, rose and fell. Daedalus built a cairn on the cliff, a simple one, not grand, not adorned, just a ring of stones placed with care. At its center, he laid a single feather that had drifted back to shore. It was bent at the tip, salt-stained and tattered, but it was his. Icarus, he whispered, placing a hand over the stone. You were more than my son. You were my light in a labyrinth. No one heard him but the wind. He could have stayed there forever. Let the wings rot on his back. Let the ocean swallow his name along with the boys. But the turning of the world has its own gravity, and grief, no matter how deep, cannot stop the tide of time. So Daedalus stood. He looked to the west, where the light was warmer, softer, and he began to walk, not back, not down, but forward, along the edge of the land, toward something new. And the sea, behind him, continued to hold what it had taken, but it did not forget. For beneath the surface, beyond the grasp of light, where dreams drift like silt, and memory floats weightless, the essence of the boy remained, not his body. That was gone, claimed by coral, by tide, by time. But something deeper, the spirit of his flight, the shimmer of his joy, The echo of his ascent still stirred the water like a secret. Dolphins leapt higher in that place. Waves whispered softer. And when the moon was full and the wind from the north was still, the sea would glow faintly with light that had no source. As if remembering, as if the sky, once open to him, had poured something sacred into the deep, and the ocean, knowing its value, had chosen to keep it safe. The days grew long. Daedalus walked the coastline for many moons, his shadow stretching thin in the early mornings and growing deep with the golden dusk. He passed through villages where no one knew his name, where children played with driftwood swords and mothers sang lullabies without fear. He asked for nothing. He told no stories. And no one asked why his eyes carried the weight of 1,000 sunsets. His wings, once his proudest creation, now hung beneath a linen cloth tied to his back, not as symbols of invention, but as relics of sorrow. He could not bear to throw them away, nor to wear them again. They remained with him like folded grief. In the evenings, he would sit alone by small fires and listen to the wind. Sometimes it brought the sound of gulls or distant thunder. Sometimes it brought nothing at all. But every so often, when the flames crackled just right and the stars blinked low on the horizon, he thought he could hear a laugh, faint and bright, carried on the breeze. Icarus's laugh, the sound of wonder, the sound of flight. He would close his eyes and remember the way his son had stood at the edge of the cliff, arms spread, eyes full of the sky. Not too high, Daedalus whispered to no one. Not too fast. But warnings had always been whispers to Icarus, heard but easily outrun by wonder. Eventually, Daedalus came to the edge of a harbor town that faced the western sea. Its people were kind, its streets lined with faded sails and gentle dogs. Here he was offered a small place to sleep and bread without question. The blacksmiths asked if he was a retired soldier. The fishermen guessed he had once been a merchant of rare tools. He did not correct them. He built small things for the town, simple contraptions that helped lift barrels, fix nets, mend carts. They marveled at his hands, how precise and patient they were. They called him the quiet master and left gifts of figs and honey at his door. He smiled now and then, but only with his lips. The people, sensing some secret sorrow, never asked about his past. They respected the silence that trailed behind him like a second shadow. One day, a little girl came to his shop. She was no older than 7, with dark curls and eyes like wet stones. She brought with her a bird with a broken wing, wrapped gently in cloth. "Mister," she said, holding it out, "can you help her fly again?" Daedalus took the bird in his hands, silent. It trembled slightly, one wing drooping. He examined it carefully, his fingers tracing the tiny bones, the fragile joints. Then, with a voice that surprised even himself, he said, "Yes." For 3 days he worked. He made a splint no thicker than a reed, binding the bones just so. He fed the bird crushed seeds and rainwater. He let it rest in a woven cage beside the window. On the 4th day, the girl returned. Daedalus opened the cage and stepped outside. The wind was calm. The sea glittered. He placed the bird in the girl's small hands. "Gently," he said. She smiled, and with careful grace, opened her palms. The bird hopped forward once, testing the edge of her fingers. Then it flew. Not far, not high, but enough. The girl laughed, a pure ringing sound. Daedalus watched the bird spiral up toward the sun, tiny wings catching the light, and felt something shift inside him. Not a breaking, but an unlocking, a turning slow and quiet. The girl turned to him. Will she come back? He looked into her eyes, the same age Icarus had once been when he'd first asked how wings worked. Maybe, he said, but sometimes, when things learn to fly, they find a place to stay in the sky. She nodded as if she understood. That night, Daedalus walked down to the shore. The tide was low. The moon lay broken in the water, a reflection shimmering across the waves. He took the linen bundle from his back. He opened it, and for the first time since the fall, he looked fully at the wings. They were worn now, bent at the joints, some feathers missing, others dull. But still, somehow, they held the shape of a dream. He ran his fingers over them. The wax had hardened again, like old memory. But the frame was strong, and in the quiet night, as the stars watched without judgment, Daedalus sat on the sand, spread the wings across his knees, and began to mend. Not to fly, but to remember. The wings lay open before him, stretched across a flat piece of driftwood, propped up on smooth stones. Moonlight pooled in the spaces between the feathers, and the hush of the tide played softly at his feet. Daedalus worked in silence. Not the silence of sorrow now, but the silence of focus, of hands moving with purpose, of a heart not untouched by grief, but no longer crushed by it. He replaced feathers one by one, shaping them with tools carved from bone and shell. Some he salvaged from the shoreline, gifts from passing birds, left tangled in sea foam. Others he made by hand, thin layers of parchment and wax, folded with care. He bound each feather to the wooden frame with silk threads taken from a net gifted by the villagers, dyed pale blue like morning sky. It had been years since he last touched the wings with intent. And now, he found, they were different. Not only in form, but in meaning. These were not the wings of escape, not a plea for freedom, not rebellion or defiance. These were wings of remembrance. With each stitch, each soft adjustment, he rewove his memory of Icarus, not the final fall, not the sorrow, but the joy. The way the boy's eyes had widened that first time the wind caught beneath the feathers. The breathless laugh as he turned midair, sun on his cheeks. The quiet way he had whispered, "I'm not afraid." Daedalus stitched that moment into every seam. Villagers came and went over the days, watching quietly from a respectful distance. Children brought feathers they found in the woods or washed up by the sea. Elders left small bowls of warm oil and cloths for polishing. None of them asked why the old man was rebuilding something broken, but they felt it. This work was sacred. On the seventh night, a storm passed through the harbor. Rain drummed against the rooftops, and lightning flashed over the water in great silent arcs. Daedalus sat inside his cottage, the wings wrapped in cloth beside the hearth, drying. He listened to the wind howl, and for a moment he thought of Crete, the maze, the walls, the prison disguised as palace. He had come far since those days, and though time had folded many pages since that fall, he knew now what had once been unclear. Some truths are only revealed in silence. When the storm passed, he returned to the beach. The sea had left new things behind. A sand dollar cracked like an eye, driftwood carved smooth as bone, a feather darker than any he'd seen before. He took it and placed it in the center of the left wing, not as a balance, but as a reminder. The sky was not always kind, but it was always honest. That morning, a boy from the village joined him at the shore. He stood barefoot in the wet sand, holding a scrap of parchment. His hair was windblown, his face round with curiosity. I drew this, he said shyly, offering it. Daedalus took the paper and unfolded it. A simple drawing. A man with wings standing beside a taller boy, also with wings. They were smiling. Behind them, the sun rose. He stared at the picture for a long time. Thank you, he said, his voice low and thick. The boy nodded and ran off to play by the tide pools, chasing crabs and tiny skipping stones. Daedalus tucked the drawing inside the cloth that wrapped the wings. He understood something now. Icarus had not flown because he wanted to disobey. He had flown because something inside him had already belonged to the sky, because the world below had never truly held him, because some souls are not meant for maps and middling altitudes. They are meant to rise and fall and rise again, somewhere else in some other form. That night, Daedalus climbed the hill that overlooked the village. The stars were thick above, scattered like seeds across velvet. The wind was cool, but not harsh. It tugged gently at his cloak, playful and persistent. He unwrapped the wings. He did not strap them to his back. Instead, he laid them out upon the grass, facing the sea. And for the first time since the fall, he spoke, not to the sky, not to the sea, but to the memory of the boy who had once been more than both. Icarus, he said softly, you were not a mistake. You were a moment of light too bright to stay. The wind stirred in reply, not loud, but present, as if it remembered the boy too. That night, long after the villagers had gone to sleep, and the harbor lights flickered like fireflies in glass jars, Daedalus remained on the hilltop. The wings lay beside him, neatly folded, gleaming faintly under starlight. He sat in the grass, knees drawn up, arms resting on them, staring out into the darkness beyond the sea. He was no longer looking for something. He was simply keeping company with the memory of what had been. The wind moved softly around him, rising from the shore in gentle waves. It wrapped around the old man like a story half told, and as he sat there, unmoving, the world shifted quietly toward dawn. At the very edge of morning, a breeze brushed past his cheek, a breeze unlike any other. It was lighter, cleaner, as if pulled from a place higher than clouds, older than memory. Daedalus looked up slowly, heart still, and in the dim shimmer before the sun, he saw something in the sky, a shape. Just for a moment, far, far above, too high for birds, too slow for falling stars, a figure moved through the air with graceful arcs, not diving, not climbing, simply circling. It left no trail. It cast no shadow. But Daedalus knew. He knew. It was not the boy, not in form, not in flesh, but it was the echo of him. The shape moved as Icarus had moved, boldly, freely, without apology. It turned once in the early light, wings spread wide, then vanished into a veil of cloud. Daedalus did not call out. He only nodded. He closed his eyes and listened to the rustling grass, the far-off lap of tide. His hands rested on the wings beside him, not gripping them, not working, but simply holding. And for the first time in many, many seasons, he felt still. When the sun finally rose, it did so without fanfare. It spilled gold across the world gently, like warm water. The sea turned to liquid light. The rooftops of the village caught fire with color, and the wings, resting in the grass, glowed softly, each feather alive in the hush of morning. Daedalus stood. He was slower now, yes, but he stood tall. The years had not bent him. Grief had not broken him. And as he looked to the horizon, he no longer saw distance. He saw continuance. He did not need to fly. He had already flown, through his son, through their journey, through everything the sky had taught him. He gathered the wings gently and carried them down the hill, not as tools of escape, but as gifts of remembrance. The village children ran to meet him, their laughter bright. The harbor bell rang in the distance. Somewhere a gull called across the wind, and Daedalus smiled, not the faint curve of lips he had worn for years, but a true smile, wide and warm. The world had not returned what he had lost, but it had given him something else, understanding. And that, in the end, was its own kind of flight. Many seasons passed. The hill where Daedalus once sat became a place of quiet wonder. Villagers would often see him walking there at dusk, his cloak fluttering in the breeze, the old wings carried carefully in his arms. Children followed at a respectful distance, their laughter soft, their curiosity glowing in their eyes. They did not ask questions, but they watched, always. They came to know the hill as Feather's Rest. It was not marked by stone or altar. It had no shrine, but it carried a reverence, as if the wind itself chose to move more gently through the grass there. Even the birds flew slower when they passed overhead, as if remembering. One morning, as the sea stirred with the first blush of dawn, a fisherman named Lysos returned from a long journey. He was older than most, his beard salted gray, his eyes narrowed from years of watching the horizon. He carried with him a strange object wrapped in sailcloth. He went straight to Daedalus's door. The old man was mending a broken garden wheel, his fingers still nimble, still patient. He looked up as Lysos approached, and something in the fisherman's face, half wonder, half fear, made him rise to his feet. "I found this," Lysos said, holding out the bundle. "Far west of here, past the black rocks, floating on the tide." Daedalus took it gently. He unwrapped the cloth with steady hands. Inside lay a single feather, but not just any feather. It was unlike those of bird or beast, long and curved, lined with tiny threads of gold. It shimmered, even in shadow. Its edges were singed slightly, as if it had once flown too close to flame, and survived. Daedalus stared at it in silence, not because he did not know what it was, but because he did. The villagers had always believed Icarus's wings had been lost to the deep, that nothing remained. But Daedalus had never stopped listening to the wind. And now, this lone, impossible feather was proof. Something of the boy remained. Somewhere. Lysos said nothing more. He simply tipped his head and left. Daedalus held the feather for a long time. It was warm in his hand, despite the morning chill, as though it carried sunlight within it still. He placed it beside the old wings, resting it across the spine where once a single feather had been missing. It fit perfectly, and in that moment, something inside him stirred. Not the ache of loss, not the echo of grief, but a quiet ember of something far older. Hope. The feather changed everything. Not in noise, nor in spectacle, but in the quiet way firelight changes a dark room. Slowly, subtly, with warmth that grows by breath, not by blaze. Daedalus kept it close, tucked beside the old wings, bound gently in silk, safe from salt and sun. He said little of it to others, though the villagers noticed something shift in his step. The sadness in his eyes had not vanished, but it no longer led the way. Something else had returned, something that looked a little like listening. In the weeks that followed, he returned more often to Feather's Rest, sometimes alone, sometimes with a group of curious children in tow. There, under the open sky, he would unroll the wings and speak not of flight, but of sky, of how the wind followed curves invisible to the eye, of how birds never truly fall, they only adjust. And always, his fingers would linger on that single glowing feather. One evening, as the sky turned the color of plum and peach, Daedalus stood at the edge of the shore and stared westward. The feather had come from there, beyond the black rocks, beyond the horizon, from a place no ship had returned from in living memory. Sailors spoke of whirlpools, of cursed winds, of stars that spun out of order. Maps ended before those waters. Stories turned to silence. But Daedalus was no sailor. He was a maker of things, of passageways, of questions, of wings. And now his hands itched again. That night, by candlelight, he laid out the old wings once more. He studied them not as relics, but as blueprints. He traced each joint, each curve. He weighed them in his arms. They were strong, still, but meant for shorter flights, lighter hearts. And Daedalus, though aged, still had work to do. He began to build again, not to flee, not to chase the past, but to follow the thread that had returned to him on the tide. The villagers watched as he gathered driftwood and resin, silk and bronze. Birds came to him unafraid, offering feathers with no prompting. The children collected strands of horsehair, polished shells, and leaves that shimmered like glass. It was not the building of an escape. It was the weaving of a path home. As the days passed, the wings took shape, wider now, broader, reinforced by thin strips of cedar and bone. They were not delicate. They were strong. And at their center, beneath the curve of the spine, Daedalus embedded the returned feather, not as a decoration, but as a guide. The villagers asked him nothing. But one night, a boy, barely more than 10, the same age Icarus had been when he first watched his father carve, stood beside him under the stars. "Where are you going?" he asked softly. Daedalus did not look up from his stitching. "I don't know," he said, "but the wind does." The boy was quiet for a moment. "Will you come back?" Daedalus paused. "I think," he said slowly, "that some journeys are not about returning. They are about remembering all the way through." The boy nodded as if this made sense, even if he didn't yet know why. When the wings were finished, they gleamed like riverstone in the sun. Not gold, not silver, but something between. A shade only seen at the meeting of dusk and dawn. They did not whisper of escape. They breathed of completion. And one morning, just before the first bell of the harbor rang, Daedalus walked alone to Feather's Rest. The sea was calm. The sky was open. The wind was waiting. At sunrise, the villagers gathered. They came in silence, drawn not by invitation, but by instinct. Word had spread, not in shouts or proclamations, but in nods, in glances, in the quiet sense that something was about to end, or begin, or perhaps both. Daedalus stood at the edge of the cliff above Feather's Rest, his back to them, the new wings already fastened across his shoulders. The fabric and frame shimmered faintly in the dawn light, like something not entirely made of this world. He moved carefully, but not hesitantly. His hands were sure. His breath was calm. And on his face, worn and weathered by years of labor and loss, was a quiet peace. He turned once to face the gathering below. They did not cheer. They did not cry. They simply watched. And Daedalus, the man who had once built a labyrinth too complex for monsters to escape, who had crafted wings from wax and dream, who had lost the boy he loved most to the sky, he nodded to them. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me remember." Then, with the care of a man not chasing glory, but honoring memory, he stepped to the very edge of the cliff. The wind met him. It was gentle at first, lifting his cloak, brushing back his hair, but then it deepened, caught beneath the great curve of his wings, and pulled, softly, steadily, upward. He leaned forward and leapt. The villagers gasped, but only once, for Daedalus did not fall. He glided, his body arched into the wind with the ease of someone who had never forgotten how to listen. The wings stretched wide, catching the current with precision born not of youth, but of understanding. He soared above the sea, dipping low over the rocks where Icarus's feather had once returned. Then he turned westward, toward the place no maps described, where the feather had drifted back from, where something unknown had whispered its final calling. He did not fly fast. He did not fly high. He flew true. Below, the villagers watched until he became a dot in the light, a thread of motion against the morning sky. Some of the children waved. One girl whispered to another, "He looks like the stories," and no one told her otherwise. Out above the ocean, the wind shifted again. It lifted Daedalus gently, guiding him across the wide water, where the sun danced in scattered paths like threads of gold stretched across a loom. Far ahead, the clouds parted, and for a moment the sky seemed to open wider than it ever had before. He passed above the black rocks, over the edge of legend, into waters where even the stars changed course. Yet still the feather at his back shimmered, steady, as if drawn towards something familiar. And then, in that space between sea and sky, Daedalus saw it, a shape, a presence, not solid, not whole, but something moving in the wind ahead. It circled slowly, just above the clouds. Not a bird, not a man, but a memory, stitched into light. He felt no fear, no ache, only warmth. And in his heart, without needing to speak or question, he knew. Icarus had never truly fallen. He had risen beyond the reach of sorrow, beyond the grasp of myth, not lost, but transformed, a part of the wind now, a note in the song of flight itself. Daedalus adjusted his wings and followed, not because he hoped to catch him, but because he knew the journey was no longer about arrival. It was about becoming. Daedalus drifted higher, not hurriedly, not in pursuit, but gently, as if the wind had become an old friend guiding him by the hand. The sea beneath him shimmered like a mirror to memory. Each current, each wave, held pieces of what had been. Laughter that once rang across a courtyard, footsteps on stone, a boy's breathless joy as he rose into the air. The wings bore him well. They did not falter. They did not strain. Their flight was steady, buoyed not by the need to escape, but by the will to remember. The feather that had returned to him glowed faintly, as though lit from within. It did not lead. It did not pull. It simply shone, quiet and sure, like a lighthouse meant for souls, not ships. Above him, the figure still circled. Not close, not far. A whisper in the clouds, a suggestion in the light. Not solid enough to cast a shadow, not faint enough to forget. And Daedalus smiled, not with triumph, not with grief, but with the knowing that some stories do not end where they fall. They carry on, in whispers, in wind, in the space between one breath and the next. The sky opened wider. The air thinned, but not coldly. It became quiet, reverent, like a sanctuary untouched by time. Here, there were no kings, no labyrinths, no warnings, just sky, just flight, just the soft hum of everything remembered. Daedalus closed his eyes. He felt the pressure of the wind beneath him, steady and warm. He felt the wings responding to each breath, each tilt of his body. He felt the thread that ran through it all, the boy, the fall, the return, the calling. And he knew, without question, that he was not flying alone. Perhaps he never had been. In that sacred silence, something moved beside him. Not seen, not heard, but felt. A presence. A hand on the shoulder of the wind. A boy's laughter echoing faintly, just beside his own breath. Icarus, Daedalus whispered. Not as a cry, not as a plea, but as a greeting. He did not expect an answer, but one came all the same, not in words, but in warmth, a current of air rising beneath his wings, holding him more gently than gravity, a shimmer of gold flickering through the feathers, a memory so clear it almost became sound. You showed me how to rise, Father. Tears did not fall. They lifted, caught in the breeze, carried upward. And in that final flight, Daedalus understood. He was not flying toward an end. He was flying into a story. One written in light, in air, in the moments between silence and song. A story where sorrow softened into peace, where loss became legacy, where love took the shape of wings. The clouds parted one last time, revealing a vast stretch of sky unlike any he'd seen. Not blue, not gold, but something beyond color, beyond description. A sky where all things remembered go to rest, not to vanish, but to shine. And Daedalus, the maker, the mourner, the father, he let go of the world below, not in falling, but in rising. Epilogue. In the village by the sea, the children still climb the hill called Feather's Rest. They look westward and hold their hands to the wind, imagining wings at their backs. They tell stories of the old man who once flew beyond the horizon, not to escape, but to follow a light that never truly went out. And on certain mornings, when the sky is clear and the tide is still, two shapes can be seen, circling high above the sea, not birds, not men, just motion woven into air. The villagers smile and whisper, they're flying together now. And the wind, moving gently through the grass, seems to agree. And so, dear listener, our story comes to a close. High tale of Icarus and Daedalus, of soaring dreams, silent grief, and the quiet healing of time, reminds us of something timeless. That even when wings fall and light fades, love remains. It lingers in the wind, in memory, in the spaces where silence turns into song. Icarus did not fail. He rose. He reached for something bigger than the world allowed. And in doing so, he became part of the sky itself. An ember that never truly went out, but drifted into something eternal. And Daedalus, in his sorrow, did not stop walking. He carried on. He remembered. And in the end, he too found his way. Not by retracing steps, but by following the wind. Perhaps, in our own way, we are all searching for flight, for light, for a path that leads beyond walls we cannot yet name. And maybe, just maybe, it is enough to simply keep walking, keep listening, keep remembering. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, for letting this story guide you gently into a softer place. If this tale brought you even a moment of peace, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps our little storytelling corner grow and ensures you won't miss the next journey into dream. And now, as you rest your head, I hope the wind that once held Icarus will also cradle you, softly, safely, lovingly. May your dreams be light as feathers, your thoughts calm as the sea, and your breath steady as stars. Good night, my friend. Sleep deeply, sleep peacefully, and always let your heart remember the sky.